Welcome to my no longer secret channel Emerald, where I ramble about whatever I feel like in the laziest format possible. And I'm saying no longer because this channel finally passed the quote-unquote main channel, the music channel, Praz CD. We finally passed that bum. After this, I'm gonna go have to harass that guy for not uploading more than once a year. I almost wonder if there's a reason he didn't upload more than once a year. And definitely not hinting that something is coming on that channel, semi-Tuaru related. But anyways, that's not what we're here to talk about. I'm recording this intro probably a week after, maybe even longer than a week after I recorded the full audio talking about the Kamisato saga. It ended up being way too long. I didn't want to upload a 3-hour video. So here we are, and I'm just thinking 2 or 3 volumes is going to have to be the max for these videos. 4 is it's just too much. I don't even consider myself to be particularly good at talking. I don't really think I am, but for some reason when it comes to Index and making videos on this channel, I can just go on for a much longer than I usually think. Before we get into it, as always, thank you for checking out the video, and if you have any thoughts about these 2 volumes, or just the Kamisato saga as a whole, or any aspects of it, feel free to leave a comment down below. I say it every single time, it's my favorite part of this channel. Just having a discussion about this wacky little short-running series that maybe 12 people know about, a certain magical index. Hopefully you're interested in it. Anyways, let's just get right into it. These next 2 volumes should be pretty interesting, 16 and 17, because these are the volumes that I heard the most negative things about. Like, I've heard some people say 16's worse, a lot of people say 17's worse. Well, if this is the worst that Index has to offer, well then this series is pretty phenomenal, because I quite liked both of these volumes. So, New Testament 16, I'll say right off the bat, I actually really like the premise for this. I really like the setup. Maybe you could argue it's not as believable, it could have gone down differently in reality, blah blah blah, sure, maybe. I don't care because I thought it was fun. So it's Index's attempt at doing something really like post-apocalyptic. So it was just this interesting combination of just completely unbearable heat. We're talking like, I think it was in Fahrenheit, like 130 something degrees, just absolutely insane. And then on top of that, the entire city is just being completely overrun by these elements. Which, here's probably one of my biggest criticisms of this volume, which it's not really even that much of it's not really that big of a criticism. I'd say it's actually kind of a nitpick. But I feel like the elements themselves were just really uninteresting. They're basically just big animals or insects or stuff like that. To me, they just way too closely resembled the 5-overs from the earlier New Testament volumes, and they reminded me of, I can't remember what they were called, but they were like those things that Saint Germain was summoning in New Testament 12. I feel like Kamichi probably could have done something a little more interesting than just making these like giant insect and animal creature things that just use like pretty basic elemental powers. It just feels like a missed opportunity to use like a much more interesting idea. But regardless, I still like the way that everything works in this setup. And it creates for a lot of like different types of conflicts. So just for example, right off the bat, obviously Toma and his class and like his school, they're having to go to their classes in this other school that's already a middle school and high school combined. So it's really like 3 schools in one. And they just like very recently started having to commute there. And so because of the absurd heat and being trapped inside the school building, everyone is kind of limited on resources, mostly water in this case, obviously. And there's this very clear awareness from Toma and his classmates that they're just draining the resources of the other schools and how the other schools are going to perceive them as a result. And because of that, they have to work harder for the acceptance and the respect of the original school members, instead of just, being entitled and outright demanding acceptance without having to, pull their own weight. So right off the bat, in my opinion, that's a pretty interesting sort of like social dilemma right there. And then on top of that, you kind of wonder, oh, well, how come Academy City hasn't resolved this situation. It seems like this should have been cleared up like nearly instantly. And that's a result of the extreme heat that, of course, if you read the volume, was caused by Fran. It's probably pronounced Fran. I don't care. I'm gonna keep saying Fran. Cope. But because of the extreme heat, it pretty much just impaired like all of the machinery and technology that wasn't like especially shielded or protected. And of course, because of that, if Academy City doesn't have technology, then, well, that's a pretty big disadvantage because all they have after that are Esper abilities, which is great. But when you have schools divided up pretty much mostly by their ability, then of course not every school is going to be as well off as another school. So obviously in this volume, Tokiwadai is doing just out, like they're doing swimmingly. They have water for days. Like they're doing completely fine for the most part. And then Toma's school is just like begging for water. But to get back to my point, so this whole sort of conflict is kind of showcasing like the struggles of such a technology dependent population. So what is, in my opinion, a pretty unique sort of take on a post-apocalyptic sort of setup. It brings out a lot of interesting sort of issues that the characters have to face. To me, it felt pretty fresh from conflicts that we see Academy City have in the past. And another thing that this setup does a phenomenal job at is bringing out the really ugly side of humanity. A pretty clear example of this, well, there's actually two fantastic examples of this. One, we find out that Tokiwadai was doing pretty well comparatively during this whole ordeal. So they actually went out of their way to try to deliver supplies to schools around them that they thought needed it. And so they tried to share some of their supplies with this elementary school. And then once surrounding schools saw this, they were so desperate for the water and other supplies that they needed that they actually like started fighting over it. And it really freaked out like the little elementary schoolers that, you know, they're little kids that need, you know, resources. And it's just these people that are well off trying to help, you know, the weakest of among them in society. But the schools that were not well off didn't see it that way. They saw it as an opportunity to just get the supplies they need to survive. So it's just a nice portrayal of just straight human greed and selfishness. And then the other example that I was going to point out is actually, I forgot it was actually New Testament 17. I read New Testament 16 and 17 like back to back without even taking a day break between them. So it all just kind of meshes together in my head at this point. But once we get to New Testament 17, I'll definitely mention that part. But anyways, I think you can kind of see why it is that I like this whole setup just in the first place. Maybe you could argue that it's, you know, this is not how it would realistically unfold, but I mean, I'm buying it. It's good enough of a justification to where I don't really care, and I kind of just enjoy what the effect of this whole setup has on, you know, the city itself and the characters and so on. To move on to some of the more lighthearted parts, well, first of all, I should probably address the elephant in the room. Is like, in this volume, everyone is just in their swimsuit, which I feel like is probably one of the points of contention for New Testament 16-17, that it is inherently somewhat fan servicey, just because, you know, every character's in their swimsuit. But it's like, at this point, man, I don't care. I'm not bothered by it. Cosmic Kamichi writes fan service, plenty of fan service in every single volume. It's like, if you're not used to it by this point, I don't really know what to tell you. And I'll even say this, I'm not under the impression that Cosmic Kamichi writes fan service scenes because he's trying to just retain the attention of just people with short attention spans or just please like a certain audience. I genuinely just think Cosmic Kamichi likes writing the fan service. I think he finds amusement in it. Every time he points out Fukiyose's breast size in a sentence, which is basically every sentence that Fukiyose's name is in, I just imagine him like giggling every time. I think he likes doing it. I don't really think he has particularly hidden motives when he's writing these fan service scenes. I mean, maybe you could argue that more from like a character design perspective or something. Like maybe he, wants Heimer to draw more lewd character designs, more kind of provocative character designs to get people's attention. Sure, maybe. In my mind, he probably just wants his series to be full of cute girls, which he achieved. But whatever, that's just a side tangent. So I'll say I really did enjoy a lot of Toma's interactions at Tokiwadai. Just all of the girls like just constantly using the word gentleman to him. It's like these girls act like they've never seen a boy in their entire lives, which to be fair, maybe they haven't. I don't know. It's just really amusing to me. And then I had to mention it. If Kuriko is involved to any significant extent, I'm gonna mention it. And what is my favorite unnecessary scene in not even this volume, bro, just this series? Toma Princess carries Kuriko a second time. This is such obvious proof. It's proof. It's not even nothing as weak as evidence. This is proof that Kamikuro is canon. It's going to happen. Mikoto can cry about it. Index can cry about it. Index can go back and find a nice, lovely man at church. All right? The signs are right there. Just open your eyes. You don't need to be blind to the truth. When the end of Index, when the end of a certain magical index comes, and the final scene is Toma taking a knee with the ring in one hand and presenting it to Kuriko Shirai, I'm gonna tell you this. I'm gonna tell you the signs were there. The foreshadowing was there, and I'll tell you, it's gonna be a fun day on Twitter when that happens. But in all seriousness, it was a pretty funny scene to me. I did really like that scene. Obviously, I'm joking with all the shipping. I really don't care who Toma ends up with. I couldn't care less, bro. He could end up with this man could end up with Nyang Nyang for all I care. For all I care. He could end up with the 1,000-year-old flat-chested, purple-skinned magic god Lolly that is probably never going to show up again in this series, and he could wife her up for all I care. But moving on from probably one of the worst points of discussion you could ever waste your time on, which I won't deny is still kind of fun sometimes. But whatever. Tokiwadai. So yeah, I enjoyed a lot of Toma's interactions at Tokiwadai. It was pretty fun overall. It was pretty amusing. There's some pretty interesting sort of ominous tension surrounding Mikoto's character, where, of course, I believe Toma said she looks like a demon or something with flying up in the sky with the AAA. And then she like casually uses the word slaughter, which I don't know if that was supposed to be a joke or actually kind of like a serious thing. I couldn't really tell. I figured it was probably a joke, but still kind of interesting either way. But yeah, I quite like Mikoto having the AAA. Usually when series do this, like they give their characters such weird sort of transformations or weird new abilities that just seem so over the top. If you just watch Naruto, like towards the end of Naruto Shippuden, like some of the fights there, they're just absolutely absurd. Like they're just crazy. And like you go back and watch older Naruto, and it's like these fights feel like nothing alike. It technically is kind of like that, but it's so weird because I actually like it. I really like Mikoto having the AAA. It's really cool and it's really unique. And the motivation that Mikoto has for actually using the AAA is a lot more interesting than just these crazy, absurd, constant power-ups to where it's elevated to such a degree where it's completely unrecognizable from where it once started. But like narratively, it just makes a lot more sense. The AAA, that is. It fits a lot better, I guess, to put it in a vague way like that. I'll put it this way, it doesn't feel like such a forced sort of power-up. And in regards to how Toma actually feels about the AAA, it's pretty interesting because he's always cautious about it. You can tell he doesn't particularly like that she's using that power. Throughout this volume, him and Mikoto, there's actually some really interesting and pretty fun to read sort of teamwork between fighting some of those like super huge level whatever elements. And I just thought it was worth noting Toma's skepticism towards Mikoto's new power, yet it is undoubtedly the reason that she's able to even fight alongside Toma so effectively throughout that part of the volume. And obviously it's what saved his life in the previous volume. Another thing I want to point out is something that Kazuma Kamichi has pointed out himself in, I think, almost all of the afterwords for this saga, was this concept of sanctuaries. So one thing that Kazuma Kamichi set out to do was to destroy this concept that the readers may have had about this sort of safe zone. So, like, in one volume they attacked, I think New Testament 14, the Kamisato faction attacked Toma at his apartment complex. And that's a place you would never expect Toma to fight at, even though even though technically I think that's where he fought Style in the first arc, but it's not a place that you would really consider at this point to be under any serious threat. So it should have been dead obvious to me that the same thing would happen to Toki Wadai, but Toki Wadai just completely destroyed it. In New Testament 17, it kind of expands upon that in a very interesting way. But yeah, so Toki Wadai, it should have been so obvious to me in hindsight that he had talked so much about destroying these sort of safe areas in the series. And like Toki Wadai, like, duh, of course he would go after Toki Wadai next. I should have been able to predict that. But yeah, Kazuma Kamichi, well, congratulations, you succeeded in destroying all these sanctuaries to the point where you just dang near you're just destroying the whole city. And this, alongside New Testament 17, Kazuma Kamichi is just absolutely obliterating Academy City. I just imagine this whole place being in pieces, basically. Like, it is constant wreckage after wreckage. And I mean, there has been just no time for Academy City to like heal and rebuild. It has been so constant. I know that Kazuma Kamichi has said he wants to keep the pacing of this series really slow, and slow in the sense that basically something is happening like every day. As each volume comes out, not a lot of time is passing. That's what I mean by slow. I know he wants to keep it slow, and not really have any major like time skips or anything like that. I kind of just want there to be a period of time where characters can relax to some extent. Just like have a week, maybe, where they're not just going to die, or the entire city isn't just gonna stop existing because of some crazy magical power or something. But yeah, that's kind of besides the point. Let me before I get into like the big stuff of this volume, let me kind of talk about just some other random moments I kind of liked. So Shokuho, not super involved in this volume. You know, I personally just kind of admire the fact that Shokuho, as unlikely and essentially implausible as her relationship with Mikoto is, she still goes for it. Like, she is, you cannot claim that Shokuho is not a loyal girl, because she still is holding on to any sort of hope that Toma could ever regain any sort of memory of her. And I know a lot of people would interpret this as just clingy or desperate, which, sure, I get, that's the pessimistic interpretation of it, but I choose to perceive it a little bit more positively. In my eyes, it's more of a sign of loyalty. But, you know, to each their own. But you know, it's a very clear, purposeful character flaw that Kazuma Kamichi wrote for Shokuho. I think it's pretty clear that this is an intentional character flaw that Kazuma Kamichi wrote for Shokuho. And I just can't help but feel that if Shokuho didn't have this sort of desperate aspect to her character, and she had just, you know, confidently moved on, I feel as if people would just call Shokuho a Mary Sue. You see, the thing is, I'm not really sure what people want from Shokuho's character. The extremely loud minority of people that just can't stand her. I mean, I guess what they want is for her to just not be in the series. But like, from genuinely just from a character writing perspective, I'm not really sure what these people want. Like, I guess if you're one of these people, like, what is it that you want Shokuho to do? What direction do you want her character to go in for you to just not despise her so much? Or is it just inherent in her, you just inherently dislike her personality or something? I don't, you know, actually, you can type your answer, but I just don't care. At the same time, I just don't care, because it's not really going to change my mind. But I would be a little interested to know what it is people particularly want from Shokuho. Anyways, to move on to another point of discussion. So there's this pretty cool little between the lines thing. I'll make this really short, but there's this pretty cool between the lines section that was Yuitsu's like breakdown report or whatever of a hypothetical riot in Academy City, and the conclusions made were like really logical in it. It was very kind of realistic, and I really liked how deep Kamichi went into the idea of like how a riot would start in Academy City, how the governing board would prevent it, you know, the backup systems that were in place, and what their overall objective was, which was, I believe, stated to just keep the adults in control of all of the students. And that was an idea that's been discussed in other volumes, like Biohacker, namely, was one that was mentioned in. Even though Biohacker came out, you know, after this volume, but I thought that was kind of interesting to point out. That's a pretty cool little section. Another sort of fun exchange I want to point out is just Salome. Man, I just really love Salome. Her personality, super cute, charming, funny, and like kind of, I don't know, obtuse. I don't even know if I'm using that word correctly, but I'm gonna use it anyways. She has really funny interactions with Toma. He is somehow able to discipline her more than Kamisato, her brother, is. For like a mass murderer, she's oddly jumpy and easily frightened or overwhelmed by Toma, and it's just super endearing to me. I really dig her interactions. But now let's talk about the bigger stuff from this volume. How far am I into this volume? And just now, whatever. Anyway, I mean, to be fair, New Testament 16 is largely a setup for 17. This wasn't a part 1, part 2 arc. They gave them different names for whatever reason, even though they flow right into each other. But Kamisato. Let's talk a little bit about Kamisato. So I probably already mentioned it, and I've already forgotten because I actually started recording this like 2 days after I stopped talking about 15. But I just love the tense relationship that Toma and Kamisato share. They both like so clearly get under each other's skin, and they just wane each other's patience. Toma throws an insult at Kamisato, calling him like bird brain. I feel like Toma never does that. I feel like it's so rare for Toma to throw such an insult, just for Kamisato to eventually throw it right back at him. And they always want to achieve like the same goal, pretty much, or that's usually what they intend. But their perspectives and methodology are just still completely different. It's one thing if you just agree on the overall goal as it is, but it's another thing entirely when you agree on the goal, but you just disagree on how to reach it. And that's just kind of portrayed through those two a lot. And honestly, this is just another scenario where I kind of just appreciate Kamisato's approach. So at this point, we find out that the heat wave and the appearance of the elements were not caused by the same person. It was Fran from Kamisato's faction that was causing the heat waves. And it was all just to, basically the extreme heat was like the weakness of the elements. So if Fran didn't cause this heat wave all throughout the city, then the elements would have just completely wiped out Academy City, essentially. So Kamisato, he's not stupid. He's aware that the heat wave is a serious threat to the city, but he doesn't hesitate because in his mind it's for the greater good. Kamisato's methods are usually pretty harsh, but they're also undeniably effective. And I just really appreciate that contrast to Toma, who is someone that never settles for anything less than the optimal solution, which I love Toma, don't get me wrong, but sometimes like that can kind of get under my skin when a main character is always trying to achieve something so unrealistically optimistic. And just being honest, I kind of just often prefer Kamisato's methodology and his approach to just resolving issues. So it seems like Kamisato, in his plans and his resolutions, there's always some sort of hardship or suffering. And in my opinion, hardship and suffering bring about an oddly positive but meaningful change in people by the end of it all. Whereas Toma is someone that often seeks and maybe this is my interpretation of Toma. Correct me if it is, but he often seeks like an answer with no suffering or as minimal suffering as possible, even if it's like completely impractical. And I gather that mostly from a line that Toma has used several times about just bringing smiles to people's faces, which is like it's super corny. But his ultimate goal in just about every single conflict is usually to make every single party smiling by the end of it, which, okay, cool, I guess. If it means anything, Kamisato reminds me, in many ways, he kind of reminds me of Lelouch. And if you have ever seen like any of my other videos, I've probably mentioned a few times Lelouch from Code Geass is like my favorite, easily my favorite character of all time. I know my entire channel is based around, my entire online persona is based around Kuriko, but in reality, Lelouch is my favorite character of all time, and Kamisato reminds me a lot more of Lelouch, and those are typically just the characters I gravitate towards. I usually don't like these characters that are in many ways like Toma, but like, I don't want to say just overly righteous, because there's much more to Toma than, there's so much more to Toma than these just like trashy, overly righteous protagonists that are basically just, what's the term? Is it Gary Sue? It's like the male version of a Mary Sue. I'm usually like just not into that archetype. But the thing about Toma is Toma works very specifically well for the franchise of Tuaru. Index is such a special series largely in part to the fact that there are multiple protagonists, and it would just not make sense for the main character to be anyone other than Toma. I'm probably not making much sense, but you know what? This is a side tangent anyways. Let's just move on. My main point I was trying to make is really, I just love the contrast between Kamisato and Toma. That's really all it boils down to. I think those two balance each other out so well. Kamisato is just a character I really admire. Like, I admire his like sense of responsibility, and he has, in many ways, he's like very pragmatic and logical, but at the same time, he still pretty much sticks true to his ideals. Just a few points that I kind of made about his character in this volume were that at one point he talks about how he would potentially want to keep World Rejector, not because he wants it, but simply because he wants to keep it out of the hands, hands, get it, of someone who would misuse it, like, you know, Kihara Yuitsu, obviously. And another thing I want to point out about him is that he, even though he's not required to do so, he feels obligated to give Yuitsu this satisfying closure to their conflict with a like fair final duel of sorts. As terrible as a person as Yuitsu is, he still has this sense of like honor and respect for her, and like he acknowledges that she shares this very similar sort of desire for revenge that he has felt. And even though she's not particularly worthy of it, he still does want to give her that satisfying closure. In another sort of development for his character, we see that he finally admits that he really does care for the girls in his faction, his harem, I should say, and he does wish to stay by their side. But at the same time, he still feels that he's ultimately holding them back. Even after he discovered that at the end of New Testament 15, that they weren't just blindly following him for World Rejector, they were indeed following him because there was something special about him. But regardless, he does still wish for them to move forward with their life instead of just hanging around him for eternity. And another sort of thing I want to point out about his character is just the duality between him and Yuitsu, really. Kind of how they reflect each other as two people that are just driven by revenge. And Kamisato at this point admits that he's kind of lost his motivation and his reasoning for exterminating the magic gods. And that might be a sign as to why he feels something like sympathy for Yuitsu. I'm not sure if you can exactly call it sympathy, but he still, maybe that's why he still felt this need to give her some sort of closure with a final duel. And he wishes, you know, to see her revenge either realized or to just finish her off for good. And then in this beautiful twist of irony, as he is fighting Yuitsu and this crazy stuff happens with this building, it's gonna like shoot up into space. I don't even remember what it was. I don't really care. But in this beautiful twist of irony, Kamisato now acknowledges that he has conflicting desires, and as he takes World Rejector back, he is swallowed up by his own power, and World Rejector is once again left in the hands of Yuitsu, who is now controlling almost the entirety of the Kamisato faction. So now Kamisato's worst nightmare has come true, and the girls that he once believed were following him purely for his right hand are now actually following Yuitsu purely for that right hand, in the hopes that one day they can bring him back somehow. Pretty insane stuff, if you ask me. I seriously thought all of this was just very well done. And I'm not really sure what people don't like about this volume, but I think most people do like it. It's just people are exaggerating their criticisms of the one volume that they perceive to be not as great as a lot of the other volumes. But yeah, just to point out a few other little things that I did kind of notice, or just some kind of observations I made. I kind of thought there were some similarities between Kamisato and Accelerator. So Accelerator, one of his kind of like main character arcs, one of the main points of it in OT was his self-perception as a villain, and he ascribed that title to himself as a way to convince himself he was still this awful person with no path to redemption. And Kamisato is kind of similar if you just replace the word villain with revenge. He repeatedly tells himself that he is on this quest for revenge against the magic gods, but after learning about the authenticity of his harem's loyalty, he begins wavering on his goal of erasing the magic gods. And then there's this scene where he's kind of talking down to Yuitsu about this concept of revenge, and it feels like then he's trying to convince himself that he still is seeking revenge, but in truth, like I said earlier, his desires are conflicting now. All in all, by this point, I'm really impressed by Kamisato's character. I feel like there's just so much you can say about this character who has only been around for, at this point, 3 volumes. And the last little thing that I want to point out is just this kind of cool line from Toma. Toma, at a few points lately in New Testament, it feels as if Toma has not been acting like himself. He's not been as sturdy in his resolve as he has been in the past. He seemed to be a lot more hesitant throughout this saga, and we finally get this moment where Toma says, I'm going to show the world who Kamijo Toma is. And it's this really cool line. I really liked just seeing Toma confront himself for his own hesitations and his lack of his typical resolve, and just facing forward with this new sense of enthusiasm. I really liked that. I thought it was a really cool way to end this volume. But yeah, all in all, I loved this volume. In many regards, I thought it was fantastic. And there was so much, like, what I would say was like beautiful irony spread out through this volume. I mean, my biggest criticism was really just like how uninspired I kind of thought the elements were. They felt like they were just a tool that they were just kind of there, not really to be all that interesting on their own. But at the same time, I actually did like the whole conflict that the city was in the first place. But honestly, I just don't see what exactly there is to be so harsh in your criticisms for. Is this like really such a bad arc to some people? I don't really see it. And I won't accept fan service as a valid argument, because that's like, no, why are you reading Index if you get upset when Kazuma Kamchi writes about a character's small butt, which he said small butt probably like 5 times in his volume. It's like, how are you not used to it at this point? I don't understand. Why do you still read the series if you're gonna cry about the fan service? Like, do you realize how far you are into this series? How are you not used to it yet? I just don't see what's so worth getting offended over. If it really is just the fan service, if it really is just Kamachi talking about characters' large breasts, small butts, swimsuits, or whatever. Like, I don't care. I don't see how you could get this far into the series and still be offended by this. You should know how Kazuma Kamachi writes by this point. If the problem is really just the setup, okay, that's one thing. But it's like, I don't really care that much how maybe unrealistic the setup is if everything else is interesting or well written, like I thought this volume was. I thought a lot of the content around Kamisato's character was nothing short of fantastic. But you know what? That's just my 2 cents. If you disagree, totally fine. I'm open to hearing why. I mean, that's one of the biggest motivations for me making these Index videos, is so that we can have like some sort of discussion over the series. But yeah, okay, let's move on to New Testament 17. I am so tired. Like, I don't think you realize how long I've been recording. This has taken me 2 days, and I think total I've probably been talking into a microphone for like 6 hours. At this point, I'm kind of just tired. Okay, so New Testament 17, the volume that the most amount of people say is the worst in New Testament. This volume is not bad. I liked New Testament 17 a lot. I thought there were a lot of great things about it. Here's my worst criticism about it. It's very long. New Testament 17 is super long. It's not as long as Baggage City, but it is very long, and there are a number of parts of this volume where it feels like not much is really happening, and the characters are very like constantly moving from one location to another, strategizing to accomplish their goal, blah blah blah. Like, there is a bit of, I guess you could say, filler, sure, if you want to say that. It does drag on a bit. Maybe the volume could have been shorter, I guess, but like at the same time, New Testament 17 had some fantastic moments, and I would say some of my favorite moments in New Testament so far. So to just start things off, the characters. So the main trio of this volume, Toma, Luca, Fran, love them. Fran in particular, just total cutie, love her design. I know Heimera loves her design, because I think I said earlier in this video, he said that Fran is one of his favorite designs, but Fran, total cutie. Luca, total cutie. Love their designs, love their personalities. I love the way they interact with each other, and there's a lot of really fun, chuckle-worthy moments throughout this volume. I'll probably talk about them a little bit more later on. Early on in the volume, there's some pretty cool ideas I want to talk about. So there's kind of this like interesting commentary on like spreading conveniently worded misinformation. That's actually a pretty common theme throughout the volume, is just manipulation through misinformation to just control the population. So at each of the shelters where people are locked up, there's these things called spheres, and they're basically the only method of communication that there is, and only the leaders of the spheres, I believe, can actually like post messages. And so different characters make use of the different message forums to manipulate what everyone is thinking. And basically the Kamisato faction that is now after Toma, Fran, and Luca, they use it to turn the tides against them. In addition to this like super authoritarian group that I will have more to say about, called Useful Spider. But yeah, the volume talks a lot about just, I guess you could call it information warfare, and then just like carefully wording things and leaving out details and making things just believable enough to set this very specific narrative so that everyone will kind of just fall in line and think that, Fran and Toma are rumored to be behind this heat wave. So as a result, everyone is going to believe that Toma and Fran are their enemy, just because of the way this information was spread and the way it was worded. But they also kind of note that there's a bit of truth. So it was Maya, who I'll have more to talk about later, Maya from the Kamisato faction, that was doing most of this. And what she was doing was she was saying a lot of things that were technically true. There were technically no lies in what she was saying, but she was leaving out important information that changes the entire context. And this actually reminds me of something in Code Geass. So if you've seen Code Geass, there's this really infamous speech from one of the main antagonists, Charles, like King Charles. Was it King Charles? His name was Charles, you get it. And what he did was he gave this speech where the most iconic line from it was, and it's how he starts off the speech. He says, "Not all humans are equal. Not all humans are created equal." And he starts talking about how, some are born disabled, some are born more talented at certain things than others. And that is wholeheartedly the truth. Not everyone is created exactly the same. And he uses that core idea the rest of the speech to manipulate the narrative of the rest of what he's saying, and to get people to agree with what he's saying. Technically, throughout the entirety of the speech, he's not telling a single lie. He's only really telling the truth, but he's wording it in such a misleading way that everyone is led to believe this very specific thing that he's manipulating them to believe. And that's kind of where this concept comes from. It's saying something that is technically entirely true. Technically, there's no lies, but you're very clearly leading people down your very specific desired conclusion. And from that stems, of course, this sense of mob mentality. And in this environment, when there's no internet, everyone is kind of just speaking through their chosen leaders at their shelters. The few skeptics that there are of the information, they'll be drowned out by the majority of opinion, or by the thought leader, you could say, that is the leader of the shelter. So anyone that would question the dialogue they don't really get a word in the matter. They don't really get to speak their mind or speak what it is they're hesitating about or skeptical of. So that's really a large part of this volume, and I'll bring it up a little bit more later on, but I kind of want to move on to some other points. We get to see World Rejector, what it's like inside of World Rejector. And it's pretty cool for what it is. The actual idea of it makes more sense to me now that we actually get to see inside of it. They compared it to frames in a movie. So let's say you're watching a movie that's in like 30 frames per second. From frame to frame, there is movement that you're not seeing, but it's moving fast enough to where the human brain can comprehend it without an issue. But World Rejector is pretty much portraying what is in between those two frames that is unseen, but the human mind kind of makes up, or fills the gaps, I should say. So the world that is inside Kamisato's right hand is pretty much just that. Everything that happens in Academy City in reality is reflected to some extent inside World Rejector. But what happens inside of World Rejector is not reflected in reality. But really what's so cool about it is just who is there, because it's like all of the magic gods that Kamisato used World Rejector on. Most notably, of course, Nyang Nyang and Nephthys. And I'll just go ahead and say the fights that take place in the between the lines segments between the magic gods are so fun to read. That might have been my favorite part of the entire volume, was just reading the magic gods fighting each other. And I feel like that's saying a lot coming from me, because I won't lie, I haven't cared that much about a lot of the fights in Index. They're fun a lot of the times, they're cool, but they're usually, to me, not always all that intense or exciting. But this was. Watching the magic gods fight in such literally an earth-shattering way, was some of the most fun stuff I've ever read in Index up to this point. We're talking like one magic god essentially froze over the entire earth into an ice age, and then Nyang Nyang gets on, I think it was the windowless building, and like turns it into a rocket and starts shooting up into space. And then another magic god is like shooting like stars or something at him. I don't even remember what he was doing, but apparently that god was also like partially a sun god. So what they did was they like essentially just bodied that magic god, who is partially a sun god, into the earth that was frozen over in this ice age, and that like ended the ice age but like destroyed the earth at the same. It was so insane. I can't even describe it while sounding like I'm not schizophrenic. Point I'm trying to make, it was fun. It was an absurdly fun and really satisfying fight to read. This is kind of what I've been wanting ever since the magic gods were introduced, because when you get beings that are this powerful, you just naturally want to see what crazy stuff would happen if they fought, and this was it. Well, we got it, and dude, it was so fun to read. It was so creative, and it was like something that you couldn't get out of any other series, and that's a point that I've been trying to make here, is that Index is a series like no other, and this is a type of fight that you can't really get from very many other series. So, of course, I'll talk more about Kamisato and Nyang Nyang and Nephthys. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but before I get there, I want to talk more about the Kamisato faction. So, I think Cosmic Kamachi in this volume, I think he wanted you to kind of hate the Kamisato faction, because they're purposely, like, really irritating throughout this volume. They're purposely acting very irrationally, and there's also this idea with them that's represented really well. So at this point, there's two groups of people that are trying to save Kamisato, who's inside World Rejector. There is the Kamisato faction, who is pretty much protecting Kihara Yutsu because she has World Rejector, and they believe that if anything happens to World Rejector, their chances of saving Kamisato is 0. And then there's Toma, Luca, and Fran, who are actively searching for a method to get him out. So what the Kamisato faction is doing is they're essentially trying to ensure that their chances of success are not reduced to zero no matter what. They may never increase, the likelihood may never increase, but at least it will never be zero. While Toma, Luca, and Fran are being much more aggressive and are trying to actually increase the likeliness of saving Kamisato. But with what they're doing, there is some sort of risk that they could mess up and it could become zero. So it's basically a battle between prevention and promotion. And I had actually recently watched a video. I think the channel name is Daryl Talks Games. He's like this psychologist guy. I think he got his degree in psychology, I think. And he talks about video games from a psychological standpoint. One of his videos was titled, I think it was Prevention versus Promotion. And it kind of talked about this very similar concept. It's a really interesting video, and I would recommend it to anyone that was interested. Regardless, I really just like the clashing of ideas on how exactly to save Kamisato. And I want to point out something that Fran said to Luca as Toma and Fran were trying to basically recruit her. Luca says, "Don't be ridiculous. I really was working to help Kamisato even as it wore me down and trampled on my pride." And then Fran responds with, "How much something wears you down isn't the same as achieving actual results. And this too is a distortion. Human beings believe they are accomplishing something as long as they keep working at something. Think of a jigsaw puzzle, a puzzle ring, leveling up in a video game, or popping bubble wrap. Luca, has your effort really led to anything practical, or was it more like a product of entertainment or a hobby?"
She's spitting. Fran is straight spitting. All I hear is fire. She is destroying Luca with facts and logic. Cry me a river, Luca.
So yeah, that was pretty cool. It was a pretty cool little speech about, not wasting effort and pretending to make progress while you're actually just stalling. Good on you, Fran. Good on you. But yeah, I think I got my point across in that one. So now I want to talk a little bit about Useful Spider. So Useful Spider is just like this super authoritarian group that just kind of shows up out of nowhere and says they're going to restore order in 48 hours. And they're essentially, they just straight up announce, like, you're going to have to give up your human rights in order for us to be able to restore order this quickly. And my goodness, they go pretty far. They start just like basically mowing people down. Like they are harming and they are injuring and like probably killing a lot of people just to like essentially take everyone's weapons that they had and so on. It's actually pretty insane what they were going for. And then there's this point in the volume where it was kind of slow at first and not really anything crazy was happening. And then just complete, utter chaos ensues. The thing is, there was so much happening all at once that I'm not even sure what happened. Honestly, in hindsight, I can't really explain what happened because it felt like everything happened. Basically, people were like falling from the sky. By falling from the sky, I think they were just like falling off of a bridge, injuring their backs, and some of them maybe even dying. I don't know the volume. I don't really know if the volume specified. And Useful Spider is just using the technology that they were able to preserve to just mow everyone down and calm everyone down. Calm everyone down by using violence is probably not the best idea, but that's what they were going for. As they're going to town on everyone, then something like just completely out of left field happens that I wasn't expecting. When Tokiwadai was destroyed by Yuitsu and the elements in the last volume, what happened afterwards off screen was that a bunch of people from surrounding shelters came over to Tokiwadai and just looted it. I'll just read basically what happened. So Mikoto says, we drove off the scientist named Kiara Yuitsu. We defeated those element things she brought in. But do you know what waited for us after we were worn down by all that? Completely normal people. With the barricade broken, strangers flooded into the school garden. And what do you think happened then? They didn't even glance our way when we were worn down and in need of help. They looked at the collapsed school building and called it a treasure trove. They said they could make money off of the drugs and equipment at such a prestigious Esper Powers development institution. They laughed and said they were only taking what had been denied them when we locked them out and refused to help them. They said this was their right and that we were getting our just desserts. She says, I did help them. I revealed the existence of the AAA I had made for myself. I protected everyone in Tokiwadai, and I used what strength I had left over patrolling outside the school garden. I didn't have to do that, but I still did it. But they said I was negligent. They said I didn't do enough, and so they said they were making up for that. Why do I have to be criticized by people I've never even met? Yeah, I shouldn't even need to point out how realistic and applicable that actually is to the real world. But anyways, as a result of Mikoto's high-class sort of status going to this, prestigious school, her efforts go entirely unrecognized, and the less fortunate masses use her high class as justification for essentially stealing from her. And my goodness, if Kazuma Kamichi does not hit the nail on the head when it comes to the group psychology here, then I don't know what does. But I want to read this line that I really liked. So it says, it'll be on screen, it says, when given 10, they demanded 100. When given 100, they demanded 1,000. It was the group psychology that saw that as perfectly normal. They had been infected by the limitless desire of those who intentionally kept themselves in a lowly position. And then, understandably so, everything that Mikoto had witnessed had enabled this sort of malice within her. And then it's noted that she can't find it within herself to forgive them. But at the same time, she acknowledges that she doesn't really even know who they are. Toma responds to this by saying, what you want to defeat might not have physical form, but I promise you will defeat it. Hurting people won't affect it, but there has to be a way to kill it, so don't lose your way, it'll be okay. That kind of rhymed. I could probably make an hour-long video about this topic alone, but I'm not gonna do that. I'm not gonna talk about that here. But I'll just leave off by saying this is excellent commentary on group psychology and mass self-victimization from Kamichi. It is, in my opinion, phenomenally done. Part of me thought this was supposed to be the climax of the suspiciously malicious, dark sort of power that she received with the AAA, but I'm not too sure if that's really what it's supposed to be or not. And of course, in my notes, I had to write that this little arc with Mikoto reminded me of Spider-Man 3, which is probably not the best comparison because that movie is like pretty infamous. But anyways, as I'm talking about this, I'm noticing New Testament 17 is a lot more like thematically focused, I feel like. I mean, a lot of Kamichi's stuff is kind of thematically focused, but for some reason, New Testament 17, it feels like he went pretty hard on the messaging. Another thing I thought was kind of being emphasized throughout this arc, really the entirety of the Kamisato saga, was I feel like it's been humanizing Toma a bit more by emphasizing his mistakes. So it feels like, maybe I'm wrong on this, but it really felt like lately he's been hesitating to act on his ideals, and when he hesitates to do that, he gets tragic results. We see that twice, one with Kamisato where he didn't stop him at the end of New Testament 16, when he essentially sacrificed himself. And then we see it again as Toma, Luca, Fran, and Mikoto are working towards their mission of using the AAA as a sort of portal to the world inside World Rejector. Toma gets a really bad feeling as Mikoto is walking towards the AAA and is about to activate it. And he does the very same thing. He hesitates. He recognizes the danger of Mikoto messing with the AAA anymore, knowing that it's, magically powered in some way, and he hesitates to stop her. And then as he does so, tragedy strikes. It was really confusing what exactly happened, but it was like Alistair using some sort of like random abracadabra spell or something like that on her. I honestly didn't really understand what it was, but it's besides the point. I just thought it was interesting that it was two moments just right off the bat. Toma was not acting on his ideals immediately. He was second guessing himself, thinking that everything would be all right, just for the worst to happen. And I think maybe that's been a common theme throughout all of the New Testament, because it feels like Toma throughout a lot of New Testament has very much so doubted himself. If you remember back, I think it was like New Testament 5, when him and Thor were fighting in that restaurant, and Thor was confronting him for, I believe, my memory's a little hazy because it's been a while, but I believe he was confronting him for that exact reasoning. Yeah, so interesting stuff. I'm trying to go a little bit faster, so I'm gonna move on. And I'm really jumping all over the place, dude. Here's the thing: this volume is very all over the place. Like, it is constantly switching from here and there, and I don't even know what order to talk about this volume in. I really don't, because I just have, like, all my thoughts on New Testament 17 are so scattered that I can't really, like, talk about it in one, like, really straightforward way. So, you know what? Let's talk about Fran next. So Fran, it was discovered that Fran was actually on the magic side, and she was a spy for the Anglican Church to spy on Kamisato, but then she ended up falling in love with Kamisato. Pretty cute Fran. Honestly, the whole thing was just kind of, I keep using this word, but endearing. I don't know what other word to use. It kind of turned into a situation where Fran knows that her love for Kamisato cannot ever really be recognized, but in her rebellion against the rest of the Kamisato faction, she confidently proclaims her love for him live on, like, TV or the whatever network thing, to where everyone can see. And it's so corny how everyone just accepts it. Basically, she won the information warfare that was happening against Maya when she broadcasted that message. And then all the people on the forums were saying stuff like, "Oh, who am I to act against a girl in love?" And then they were all, like, encouraging her and motivating her. And it's so corny. It's so cliche. I don't care if this is some High School Musical BS. I liked it, man. I thought it was cute. I don't care if it's some sappy rom-com garbage. I liked it, all right? And, you know, really, I don't have all that deep of reasoning for liking Fran. I say this about a lot of characters in this series, but dude, she's just fun. She's just cute, and she's funny. She has some charming moments, and I just enjoy her presence. You know, there's a lot of characters that I will just say I don't really have anything all that deep to say about them. Not that there's nothing that you can extract from Fran's character. There obviously is. I've said a few things about her in here so far that are meaningful in some way. Overall, like, really, I just enjoy her presence. I like the way she talks. I like her cute little mannerisms. I like the fact that she is obsessed with this British mascot thing called Bunny Gray. It's silly. It's so overly moe, but you know what? I don't mind because it's cute and funny. And, you know, I could probably say the same thing for Luca. I don't really have anything particularly deep to say about her, but I loved Luca. She was just a fun character, and I enjoyed her interactions. I enjoyed her personality a lot. And you know what? She had a pretty cool ability. Let's move on to, let me talk about Nyang Nyang and Nephthys a little bit. So, Nyang Nyang, it's still hard for me to say, and Nephthys, they kind of shine in this volume for me. They have such carefree personalities, even as this just absurdly intense fight between these magic gods that they essentially say is going to last in eternity, which is pretty funny. Yeah, they're so carefree through it all, and they're just having a blast while they're fighting. Like, they're just enjoying it. Being sucked into World Rejector ended up being like a pleasant surprise for them, because it was pretty much exactly what they had wanted, because it's this world where it doesn't matter how much they destroy, because at midnight it all resets and they can just go all out. They don't have to hold back their power. They can just be entirely themselves. They could fight for eternity and be completely fine if they wanted to. But what I really like about them here is, so as Kamisato is confronted by a bunch of the magic gods, Nyang Nyang and Nephthys take his side, and it's because they want to be godlike in this way. They want to do it's consistent with Nephthys' character, because, you know, she actually did this in New Testament 14, but they want to do something godlike with their lives. And like they said, there's nothing more godlike protecting a human as they did in their fight against the other magic gods, where they were protecting Kamisato. I really liked it because it shows that they still have a heart, you know, they still have a sense of sympathy, if you would call it that, I guess. They were still kind of empathetic towards Kamisato's situation, and they still ultimately wanted a resolution for him. I'll say that this conclusion with Kamisato's character has just been, to me, it's been fairly impactful. I've really enjoyed his character arc from beginning to end, and I think this was a really great conclusion for him as he gave this sort of speech and kind of opened up to the magic gods. So from what I could gather, Kamisato simply wanted a normal life with a normal talent that he could brag about to people at school, and World Rejector would not allow that for him, and it set him on this very dark but also very meaningful path that he ironically calls meaningless. When Kamisato would have said he wanted something special, he meant something fairly normal, like, oh, I wanted to be just good at karaoke. I just wanted something that I could brag a little bit about at school, and I could use it just to start conversations, just to have discussions. But instead, he ended up with this one-of-a-kind ability that just led to nothing really but bloodshed. Bloodshed and something akin to an identity crisis, I guess. Something that confused him as to who he really was and what he was really doing. Undoubtedly, World Rejector is responsible for Kamisato's personal growth and the self-discovery of the girls around him. And as World Rejector chose him specifically, there was meaning in that manifestation, both for Kamisato and his environment, and that is something he did not want. He didn't desire to be this important piece on a chessboard, but he didn't have a say in whether he became that or not. And understandably so, that causes a lot of frustration and self-confusion, which he eventually decides to take out on the magic gods in an act of revenge, which he notes really just felt empty every single time he erased another magic god. He kept erasing magic gods in hopes that it would start to feel real to him. And I just have to say, there's so much depth to Kamisato's character. Like, all of his struggles come off as very human to me. It's the confusion he feels after receiving such an insane power, the emptiness he feels on this quest for revenge, the frustration of receiving praise for something that he thinks is meaningless, the rejection of the personal feelings that all of the girls around him feel for him, the pain from being criticized by someone like Salome, like, you know, a close family member like Salome, and the envy that he felt towards those who had something special that he admired. All very real and relatable struggles. There's really so much that can be said about him. I still feel like there's a lot that I'm missing. I feel like there's still a lot that I could say about him. I don't know if you can hear it, dude. My allergies are acting up so bad right now. It's like 3 in the morning and I didn't even get hardly any sleep last night. I'm just trying to get this video finished. I think I've gotten the point across of what I think about Kamisato. I'll just point out one last thing that I really liked. He always uses this line, the kind of normal high school boy that you can find anywhere. But then I think it was Nephthys. Maybe it was Young, but it was Nephthys. She said to him, you keep saying that phrase, but the kind of normal high school boy is something you can't actually find anywhere. I love that line. I love that line because it's something that I've noticed in my personal life. The more you talk to people, the more you realize that no one is actually particularly normal. The more you learn and interact with people, the more you notice their own like personal oddities or what it is that makes them special in some way. And it's just kind of an interesting thought. All right, I really gotta wrap up this video because I'm feeling like garbage right now and I don't want this video to be too long. So let me just kind of note some other random thoughts that I kind of had throughout the volume, and then we'll just close it from there. So one thing I noticed throughout this saga a lot was, my goodness, Kazuma Kamichi loves giving characters like nicknames. At one point he calls Toma, he says trenchcoat pervert Kamijo Toma. I wish I had wrote down a bunch of the other ones, but it's just a funny observation. There are so many just nicknames like that Kazuma Kamichi had for these characters. Another point, Yuitsu looks great in a bikini. Well, a lot of these characters do, but you know what? Yuitsu, I don't know how old Yuitsu is, but you know what? If she's an older woman who knows, she's looking absolutely fantastic. Beautiful woman, surely she could do no wrong. And on the note of Yuitsu, I have to say I did quite like her as an antagonist throughout this saga. She was a pretty interesting reflection of Kamisato. And I like the sort of open ending that they had here, where I think even in the afterword, Cosmo Kamachi says for you, the reader, to, debate on if you think the Kamisato faction killed Yuitsu or if they allowed her to live. Personally, I felt like it would have been more in line with the Kamisato faction to kill her, but at the same time, with Kamachi's typical way of writing, I feel like he wouldn't want to have killed her. So I assume she doesn't show up again for the remainder of the series. But what do I know? I forgot to mention. Okay, so there's actually a character I dislike. Like, I don't think I've disliked any characters in New Testament until now. And when I say dislike, I don't mean dislike as in, I want this villain to get taken down because they're bad, and I don't like them because they're bad. I mean, like, dislike as in I actually don't enjoy their presence in the series, and that is Maya, the ghost girl. I actually just don't like her. I did not care whatsoever about the explanation of why she was a ghost girl and how that was scientifically explained. It sounded like an interesting idea. I didn't care to really put much effort in understanding it, but I just found her extremely, like, aggravating. Like, she was such a hindrance in this volume to the other characters. And then when she turns into this, like, giant, grotesque ghost, whatever, like, I was not into that. I just do not like Maya. There you go. There's a negative opinion from Emerald. Besides her, though, I really did enjoy a lot of the Kamisato faction, especially a lot of their designs. I thought a ton of their designs were, like, super cute. I just consistently love Haimura's designs so much. But, like, in that regards, I actually really did enjoy the presence of a lot of the Kamisato faction girls. So I really don't have that much against his harem as a whole. But there were definitely some... I think really in NC-17, you're kind of intended to not really like them. I mean, there's this one line where they're just straight up talking about upholding the status quo for, like, saving Kamisato. And that actually, like, made me irritated. Like, you were so stupid. You were so dumb. One thing I want to point out is the sudden change in heart from Useful Spider. So you could write it as just, overly coincidental. But I kind of liked it. I kind of liked that despite the horrible things that Useful Spider did, there were people in the group that genuinely cared about restoring order and rebuilding the city. They were willing to help Toma towards the end, and I thought that was actually kind of cool. Let's see, another moment, Toma just knocked out Ellen. My goodness, Ellen is such a cute, fragile, small girl. The thought of Toma just knocking her out it makes me feel bad, but it also is, like, really funny at the same time. You would have to pay me a large sum of money to just hit a girl like Ellen. I would just feel too bad. You'd have to pay. I'm telling you, you have to pay me a lot of money to punch that girl. I'm talking like $20, maybe 15. Next one. Here's a criticism I have. I really wanted to see art of the magic gods fighting, but we did not get any. There was no art, I believe, of the magic gods fighting. That would have been so cool to see. I wish we could have gotten something from that. Oh my goodness, I forgot to talk about the nameless man that confronted Alistair. That was, like, an important thing I wanted to talk about. So the confrontation between the nameless man and Alistair, loved that scene. Absolutely loved that scene. And there's one line where he says, the nameless man, he says, "It is great men who create the world, but normal people that gradually distort it." He acknowledges that he is essentially a nobody. He is not someone relevant in this grand story. But that does not change the influence that the collection of those supposedly nameless people have on history. His confrontation of Alistair could have been a meaningless action, but it also could have been that slight push that changed the entire course of history from that point forward. And that idea to me was so powerful. I really loved that. It was such a random little part of this volume, but I really loved it. I'd wrote in my notes that, to me, there's something really inspiring about seeing a nameless, average working man just confront this cold, apathetic, tyrannical leader with nothing but the truth. And, like, he simply stood his ground and spoke his mind, knowing that he would likely die for opposing such a ruler. He is a true man for sticking up for his fellow commoners, believing that he may even have a slight impact on the course of history. Like that guy is a Chad in my book. Another little observation I made was I feel like the volume kind of talked about tyrants a good bit. So there were like 3 different tyrants that were depicted, and there were different reactions to the different forms of tyranny. So first, there was Kihara Yuitsu, and as she gives hope to the Kamisato faction of bringing back Kamisato, the majority of the 100 girls begrudgingly follow her orders in fear of losing their only chance of bringing him back. And then the second example was Useful Spider, though they kind of changed at the end, but through their organizational tyranny, I can't talk, guys, it's 4 a.m. Through their organizational tyranny, they used the return of order to the city as an excuse for taking away the citizens' weaponry and their rights. And while we know people are fighting against them to keep themselves armed, some people are probably also like in support of those actions to guarantee their own safety. And the third was Aleister Crowley, and while his tyranny is not necessarily direct in this case, he's allowed everything to happen as a result of his neglect. And when opposed, he just straight up killed that guy just for confronting him. So I don't really know how much of this was intended, but I feel like the word tyrant was used a number of times. It kind of led me into that thought, that revelation of sorts. And here's the last little thing I think I'll point out before I just kind of wrap up. So Kihara Yuitsu's like ultimate plan was really interesting. I called it mass Kihara grooming. So essentially, she wanted to use the Kamisato faction, which was now under her control, to spread the fear of losing something more important than your own life as conditioning to change behavior on a societal level. She's talking about like re-engineering society to a point where everyone is basically a Kihara, and it's just like this sick-headed society where you're not even bothered by the sick, gross experiments people do, because it's like you're doing it, your neighbors are doing it, everyone is doing it. It's just grooming society into making something like that natural. And funnily enough, she even said she didn't like the idea. She only wanted to go through with it just to accomplish her arbitrary goal set by Nokon. But yeah, okay, actual last thing. Tsuchi Mikado, you do not know how excited I was when Tsuchi Mikado popped in at the epilogue and like shot Aleister Crowley. I was so pumped. Tsuchi Mikado is my favorite male character in this series. Tsuchi Mikado is a top 5 favorite character for me. I love this guy so much. Dude, when I watched season 1 of Index, I didn't even like Tsuchi Mikado. He was my least favorite character in season 1. This man is a massive legend. I love him. He's one of my favorite characters. His presence in this series is so cool to me. It's so fun. He's just such an enjoyable Giga Chad. That's what he is. He is complete, total Chad. Have you seen his jawline? Have you seen his shades? I am excited. I'm excited for the Tsuchi Mikado Fran duality. Now that Fran is like gone down she's separated from the Kamisato faction and she's going down this different path. I am pumped. I am so excited for Tsuchi Mikado and Fran. Like I don't know what to expect, but I am excited. So let's go ahead and wrap it up. General thoughts on New Testament 17. Overall, I quite liked it. Yes, there were parts that dragged on. I think maybe the volume could have been a little shorter. There were parts that definitely weren't super exciting to read, but there were parts that were very exciting to read, and there were some parts that I thought were extremely impressive. Some of the fights were just a complete blast to read. Some really cool ideas, really cool themes and messaging in there. Really love a lot of how the characters developed, especially Kamisato. Kamisato was thoroughly impressive character to me. I'd even argue that he was one of the most compelling characters in the series. I'm not joking either. I will say I was disappointed with Salome in New Testament 17. She was basically just like being sat on by Yuitsu, And I was like, man, why'd you have to do that to like one of my new favorite characters, man? Why'd you have to do that? I kind of hope Salome does a little bit more in the future. I kind of doubt that's going to happen, but I would like to see more of her. But yeah, some of the highlights for me were really in regards to Mikoto's malice and that whole sort of exchange that happened. Kind of the tyranny and authoritarianism was kind of interesting. I love the contrast of this idea of like chasing victory versus preventing loss. I loved that scene with the faceless guy, the nameless guy, and the impact that the faceless people can have. Accepting the responsibility of the power and talent you have, even if you never wanted it. I really enjoyed a lot of the characters that were prominent in this volume. I loved the magic gods. I loved Fran and Luca, and just I really enjoyed a lot of them. And really, honestly, just talking about this whole saga, I really love this whole saga. I really love this story of Kamisato. Everything about his character from where he was to where he is by the end of it all. Just such a wonderfully developed character that just has such like genuinely relatable human struggles. Overall, I think this is probably a pretty slept on part of New Testament, because I know most people like to talk about the Oathnis arc, they like to talk about the Alistair stuff. I'm really excited to read the Alistair stuff, don't get me wrong, but I love the Kamisato stuff as well. Like, I thought it was some pretty compelling material. You know what? 17 volumes in, still waiting for a miss. It's probably not going to happen, because if I liked the volume that people criticize the most, and I'm sure I'm going to like the rest of it too, but you know what? I'm ready to get on out of here. So if you watched this far, as I'm recording this, it's 2 hours and 42 minutes. In reality, I've actually probably been recording for like 8 hours total. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, this video was a nightmare. This video was a nightmare to work on, and especially for the last like half hour, I said all nasally because I got allergies, but I told myself I'd finish it tonight. But you know what? If you watch this far, you are a massive, massive legend, and I love you very much, and I really appreciate anyone and everyone that got this far. And you know what? I appreciate even the people that listened for like 10 seconds. Tell me what you think about these volumes in the comments below. What were some of the highlights for you? What were your critiques that you had of any of these arcs? Let me know literally whatever you want to let me know in the comments. And of course, if I missed anything, which even though this video is as long as it is, I'm sure I missed something. Feel free to let me know. Or if I got anything wrong, feel free to correct me. If I misinterpreted something, let me know. I'm always open to that stuff. As always, thank you so much for just taking the time out of your day to listen to this complete nobody just talk nonsensically about this fictitious series that maybe like 13 people actually read. And I also want to say thank you to Cosmo Kanchi, thank you to Kiyo Takahimura, thank you to everyone that is involved with the making of the 2 franchise. I love this series to death, and I hope to be reading it for a very, very, very long time. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a nice day, night, week, month, year, decade, life. I'm gonna go to sleep now.